Hey guys, I want to talk about the disaster that's being declared in El Paso right now. Part of what they are giving themselves the authority to do is set up roadblocks and things like that, quarantine zones and curfews. And they've been getting all of these brand new concrete barriers put up all over uh, the outskirts of the city, especially along Route 10 for the last couple of months. This is something that they've been preparing for a very long time. But when you listen to what Oscar Leeser said the other day in the press conference, he said that he was declaring a state of emergency. But the clerk posted on the government website that they officially declared a disaster. Now, those two things are different. Texas code defines a disaster differently than it defines a state of emergency. And the disaster, the chapter 418 talking about a state of disaster, is far more in depth and broad than declaring a state of emergency. So what he said in the press conference differs from what they published on the website. And so that's significant because different government codes define those two things, and they're defined differently. Okay, now when you read the declaration of disaster, they are authorizing themselves to set up curfews in the city. Now, this is only supposed to last, according to the declaration, for 7 days. But in his press conference, he said it's going to last 30 days. So what we're experiencing is several discrepancies between the press conference, what he said at the press conference, and what was posted on the government website. Okay, and this is a big deal, okay, because words really do matter, right? So are we in a state of emergency, or are we in a disaster, right? Because in the disaster, in government code 418, they are required, there's three things that they're required to do in order to declare a legitimate disaster. One of the things that they're required to, which they did not do, is define the zone, to declare what zones, what areas the disaster exists in, right? They did not do that when they posted the declaration on the website or when they held the press conference, okay? So right there, on its face, the disaster is already illegitimate out the door, okay? Now, some of the powers that they are trying to grant themselves are to set up quarantine zones. Why? Why all of a sudden are you needing to talk about implementing health regulations, quarantine zones, and stopping the flow of traffic in and out of the city, right? And setting up curfews, right? We're talking about 12,000 to 15,000 migrants, right? And there's no intel, at least not open source, that these people are carrying bubonic plague or Ebola or some kind of Marburg or whatever. There's no intel that these people who are in Juarez right now are, some super spreaders of some zombie virus, right? There's no intel like that whatsoever, right? But they're putting that kind of authority in this illegitimate disaster declaration. And I say it's illegitimate for a very specific reason, which I have already outlined, right? They did not declare what zones in the city are experiencing or will be experiencing a disaster. They are required to do that by law, and they did not, right? So you're trying to tell me that the entire city of El Paso, which is pretty huge, it's actually pretty big on both sides of the mountain, is going to experience a disaster because 12,000 people are coming into the city? I don't think so. That's not a disaster, right? Maybe a humanitarian crisis, right? But we're not talking about widespread destruction of property because 12,000 people all of a sudden come in the city. No. No, they need to define the zone, and they didn't do that. And because they didn't do that, it's illegitimate. But they want to grant themselves these health authorities, these health regulation authorities, right? Which, or powers, which, hopefully they don't use to try to round people up, right? Because what's been going on for the last 4 years is obvious to a lot of people, right? These globalist eugenicists have been trying to basically force people to edit their genome, to edit their genes. And we don't want to do that. We didn't want to do that. We said no, right? And it seems like there's going to be a test case where they're trying to see how the people of El Paso are going to react if we lock them down and say they can't go in and out of the cities, and say that, hey, you've got to get tested. You've got to get tested. You got to take this injection, potentially gene editing injection. You got to get your kids tested, right? Why do they need that power? If this is a disaster, right? If this is a disaster and there's property destroyed and massive loss of life, which we have not seen yet. We have not seen anything like that. Okay? Hasn't happened, right? Doesn't mean it won't happen, but it doesn't mean it will either. Okay? We haven't seen massive destruction of property. We haven't seen a bunch of dead people on the streets here in El Paso, and yet they already roll out this disaster declaration that they called a state of emergency, which it's not what it is, right? And they're granting themselves these powers to try to test you to see if you're going to let them get away with it. Are you going to let them get away with an illegitimate power grab right in front of your face, where they're telling you to your face that they now have the power to shut down traffic into and out of the city, set up quarantine zones for what? People dropping dead all over the city? Where? I see people walking up and down the sidewalk, taking their dogs for a walk, taking their kids on a stroll. There's literally a guy dancing in front of me right now. Literally, a dude dancing, walking down the street, right? I mean, holy smokes. So, no, there's no reason for them to need the power to set up quarantine zones, right? Now, I understand, all right? 12,000 people, 15,000 people all of a sudden coming into the city. They need to grant themselves some kind of authority, right, to deal with the problem. I get it. It makes sense, right? But quarantines and totally locking down the city? No, I'm sorry. I don't think so. I don't think so. 12,000 people may sound like a lot, but when you step back and you look at the amount of people who've been coming through every year, it really is just a drop in the bucket. And that's not to say that we don't need to secure our southern border. We do, okay? But that is the goal and the directive of Border Patrol. They ought to do it. And then if they can't do it, you're supposed to get National Guard to help them out. And the DOD if it is a state of emergency. If we're talking about people coming in and causing violence, then you need to prevent the people from coming in the first place. You don't need to set up quarantine zones in the city and lock it down and set up curfews and try to trample upon the rights of the people of El Paso and the great state of Texas. So no, I wanted to make this video so you know your rights, okay? Under Chapter 418 and 433, they are not allowed to force you to do any medical procedure whatsoever. They're not even allowed to force you to undergo testing or analysis, right? You are allowed to say no to that. You are under Texas Code, Chapter 4, Texas Government Code, Chapter 4, 418 and 433. They cannot do anything to you if you refuse to be tested or if you refuse treatment, right? They're not allowed to do anything to you for refusing any of that, right? You have the right to refuse that. So just keep that in mind. They also don't have the authority to seize your weapons or your ammunition. Not if you are possessing your firearms lawfully, right? If you're carrying your firearms lawfully under government code 418 and 433, they're not allowed during a disaster or a state of emergency, either one, they're not allowed to seize your weapons. So if anybody comes to your door, or if anybody tries to take your guns, or anybody tries to give you an injection, you do not have to comply. And if they try to take your guns, you can defend yourself. So I just wanted to put that out there. Wanted to make sure everybody gets it. Everybody knows where we're going here, and what the discrepancies are, why it's already illegitimate. It was illegitimate at the beginning on its face. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. You want to support my channel, there's a link in the description box where you can do that. You can buy me a coffee. I would definitely appreciate it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And as always, don't forget, help out your neighbors. Bye.